listener production.
Hello, Katrina Blowers here with you for the briefing. Well, it was one of the most shocking murders in Australia's history. A dad, Robert Farquharson, convicted of murdering his 3 sons by driving them into a dam on Father's Day almost 20 years ago. 2 different juries found him guilty, the most evil payback to his wife, who'd begun seeing someone else. But now there's a new campaign for an appeal suggesting Robert Farquharson may have been wrongfully convicted after suffering a rare type of coughing fit that can make you black out. But not everyone is convinced.
There's nothing to show that he had cough syncope, except he had a couple of turns whilst awaiting trial the second time. I thought, how convenient in front of people.
Today we hear the other side of the story from crime journalist and author Megan Norris, who covered the original criminal trials and feels a sense of obligation to be a voice for Cindy Gambino. She's the mother of the 3 dead children who's no longer here to tell her side of things. First though, let's get all the day's top news with Betsy and Seabet. It is Tuesday, June 11.
Good morning, Katrina. Coles has announced a 2-carton limit on buying eggs after bird flu was detected in Victorian farms that supply the supermarket. Avian influenza has been detected on 5 farms in Victoria, and 500,000 chickens have been killed to contain the outbreak. Under Australian guidelines, once the virus is detected on a farm, all the birds have to be euthanised. The 2 dozen eggs purchasing limit applies everywhere except WA, and this is just in Coles supermarkets. We don't know yet how long the restrictions are going to be in place.
Yeah, so we've had some reassurances from the Federal Health Minister that these are not strains that can pass on to humans. And the Victorian Minister has also said there's no need for consumers to stockpile or panic buy eggs, toilet roll style during the pandemic. Victoria earlier this year did record a human case of bird flu when a child returning to Australia from overseas became unwell and then tested positive for the H5N1 strain. This case, though, that I just mentioned was not related to the outbreak on the poultry farms, and the Victorian Department of Health is saying, look, the chances of avian influenza spreading among humans in Australia is low.
My question on all of this is, why do you need more than 2 cartons of eggs? Like, how many people are in your house?
If you're counting your macros or you're on some kind of keto paleo thing, maybe you're just eating a lot of omelettes, lots of egg whites. Who knows?
So true. I just wonder whether this will have kind of the opposite of the intended effect. I think you might see some people going to Woolies and stocking up on all those eggs. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to try and press for a Gaza ceasefire deal. The meeting comes after Israel rescued 4 hostages from Hamas in Gaza, but killed more than 270 Palestinians and injured more than 600 in the process. There was partying in the streets of Israel following the rescue over the weekend, but also international outcry over the deaths of Palestinian civilians. US President Joe Biden had publicly announced this ceasefire proposal, but there's been no formal response from Hamas or Israel.
Yeah, all this comes at a pretty interesting time when the Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz has resigned from Benjamin Netanyahu's emergency government over his handling of the war in Gaza. Mr. Gantz gave a televised address where he said Mr. Netanyahu was preventing us from advancing toward true victory. So Gantz is a centrist who has repeatedly clashed with Netanyahu over his post-war plans for Gaza. And what all of this means is that Netanyahu will now have to rely more heavily on the political backing of ultra-nationalist parties, which have called for a complete Israeli occupation of Gaza.
Far-right political parties have surged in several European countries as results continue to come in from the European election. While mainstream parties maintained control of the European Parliament, there was a significant swing to the far right in France, Germany and Austria. The French President Emmanuel Macron called a snap election and dissolved the French Parliament in response to the results. It was a pretty stunning move since he still has 3 years left of his presidential term.
This is a serious and weighty decision, but above all, it is an act of trust.
That translation thanks to Bloomberg. So it shows anti-immigrant and anti-environmentalist sentiment becoming more mainstream in Europe.
And finishing with some brighter news out of the pool overnight. It looks like our swimmers are going to be on fire for the Paris Games, with the Queen, Ariarne Titmus, swimming the fastest women's 400-metre freestyle time ever on Aussie soil.
Ariarne Titmus goes in. She's after the world record. She'll get it. She'll get it all right. A fantastic performance in a world record to Titmus.
What was so amazing, Benson, is that at many times during the race overnight, she was a full body length ahead of her own world record pace. She just keeps getting better and better. So these are the Aussie swimming trials in Brisbane. Arnie touched in eventually at 3 minutes 55.446, which is just 0.6 seconds shy of the record she set in Japan. And it definitely does book her a ticket to the Paris Olympics to defend her title.
What an incredible performance. And the incredible performances kept on coming in Brisbane, with Kaylee McEwen shaving another chunk off her own 200-metre medley national record to also make it through to Paris.
It is going to be an exciting games to watch, which we all need. Thanks, Benson. Now, if you guys love a bit of true crime, stick around for our deep dive today, with new questions raised about the so-called dodgy science that put a dad behind bars for driving his 3 sons into a dam. Let's get into our briefing now on the reopening of one of Australia's most shocking murder cases, where Robert Farquharson was convicted of murdering his 3 young sons by driving them into a dam nearly 20 years ago, no less, on Father's Day. In circumstances eerily similar to Lindy Chamberlain and Kathleen Folbig, Farquharson has always claimed he never killed his children. And now a new lawyer and scientific experts agree a judge and jury may have put an innocent man behind bars. Now, if you've been following this story in the news, there's a lot of new info being presented in favour of Farquharson's wrongful conviction idea, but not everyone is convinced, and one of them is Megan Norris, who's a crime journalist and author who covered the original criminal trials. Megan, thank you for joining us on the briefing. So, a fresh appeal has been launched in light of new laws that have been introduced in the state of Victoria. What has prompted you to speak out?
I was asked by Cindy Gambino Moores, the children's grieving mother, approached me after the second trial and after he was returned to jail for 33 years minimum. I was asked by her if I would write a book for her, because she knew that I'd covered it all along. And look, she was in a different place there. She was in total denial. She was absolutely paralysed by denial, and she was heavily medicated. After the second trial, she believed that he was guilty. She believed the jury had made the right decision. She had a very different view of it. And she felt really guilty that she had not been a voice for her children at the time. So she wanted a book that would be there, that would be her voice and give her kids a voice, the children she'd felt she'd failed. So I wrote the book for her based on many, many interviews that I did with the family and the court case itself. And it was an absolutely heartbreaking, it's probably the most heartbreaking story I've ever written. And I've written lots of books on people who've survived, had their children murdered or have had a partner murdered. It's still the most upsetting case that I've ever done. And the only one I've done with 2 trials, and 2 appeals. So I feel that this is her voice, and she doesn't have one now because she died 2 years ago. So when I see all this stuff on TV and in the newspapers, with the greatest respect, he has every right. That is a good story. If he is an innocent man, it is a good story, and they should be reporting it. But it's disappointing the way it is being reported, I feel. And Cindy, of course, has no voice. So the only voice is her book. And they're mentioning all the books that have condemned the verdicts, but nobody has mentioned this one.
In your mind, what are some of those things that are being overlooked as the case once again comes to public light?
Well, they're talking about compelling new evidence, where they're saying, that we're going to slowly dismantle piece by piece every bit of evidence. Well, that's all very well, but when you're on a jury, and you've got to remember 2 juries, 24 people, ordinary people, 2 juries, 3 years apart, heard that case. And they heard the whole case. So they heard all the evidence that wasn't scientific. They have the benefit on a jury of seeing people give their evidence, of being able to gauge whether a witness is credible with what they say, whether they look like they might be credible, whether it sounds outrageous or stupid. They took into account a lot of things. One of the things that I feel particularly upset about is the portrayal of Cindy, the vision that was used on TV that shows her wholeheartedly supporting Robert Farquharson as an innocent man. Well, she did, but that video was made at a time where she was in absolute denial because she couldn't bear to think that she'd missed something. If this were true, what did she miss? What did that say about her and their marriage? In fact, their entire lives together. So, she saw things differently, and she only said things that would support him in that interview. But there were other interviews later on Foxtel's Crimes That Shook Australia on Channel 7 that said quite different things. So it's sort of portraying a different vision. The evidence of the scientists that Dr. Chris Seinfort, gave evidence at 2 trials about he thought Robert had cough syncope, and he thought there was every likelihood that he did have cough syncope. Well, his evidence was totally dismissed by 2 juries, completely rejected, because they'd heard the other evidence, which nobody heard on TV and nobody's hearing in the papers. There was absolutely no medical evidence whatsoever to support, at the time, immediately after this tragedy, to support Robert's claims that he'd had a coughing fit. He did not have a chest infection. On TV, they said he was being treated, he got a serious chest infection. No, he didn't. He had the flu and he'd had a throat infection, not a chest infection.
We should add here that the condition that you've just mentioned, it's very rare, and it's where you are prone to fainting after you've had a coughing attack. Am I correct there?
Well, it's very, very rare. Other evidence was given which the jury accepted, that it was so rare that this very prominent specialist from the Alfred Hospital, a respiratory thoracic specialist, had never seen it in his entire career. That's how rare it was. Christopher Seinfort's evidence was based on seeing Robert Farquharson 8 months after this tragedy, and was based on himself reporting a history that could not be proven. So he even himself, at the time that this happened, the very first people, when Robert swam through you have to look at the whole scene, freezing cold nights, cold night air. This man, who's a really poor swimmer, says on his account that the car plunged by accident into the dam because he was unconscious and he'd got a terrible infection. No, he didn't. And he swam 24 metres across that dam in the freezing cold, across the paddock, which was a big paddock. He crawled up an embankment back onto the main road, where he wasn't coughing and wheezing once. And the passers-by that pulled over, his first words to them was, "I've done a wheel bearing. I've put the car in the dam. I've put the car in the dam." He blamed it on a mechanical fault. He didn't say, "Oh my God, I've had a terrible accident and blacked out." Those were not his first words. And when they said, "Where's the dam?" they couldn't see it. "Let's go down there. We're skinny. We'll get in. No, don't want you to help." "Well, what about we ring emergency services?" "No, thank you." They offer him a phone twice. "Let's call an ambulance. We'll go and get in that dam." "No, thank you. I want to go to Winchelsea and tell Cindy the kids are dead." It's extraordinary. So the jury saw all of this and heard all of this evidence from the actual witnesses who gave their evidence and were distraught that they had not stayed. They were distraught that they'd left the scene. So then he had an examination at the scene because he went to Cindy's, knocked on the door. She immediately said, "Where are they?" And he said, "Then I've had an accident. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened." And he wasn't making sense. So she took him back to the dam, where he said, "You've gone too far." So he knew where the car had gone in. He knew. He said, "You've gone too far, turn around and go back." He later told people he didn't know where it was, didn't know what had happened, didn't know where it was. He knew exactly where it was. And, of course, he didn't help.
Megan, you mentioned earlier that Cindy, Robert's ex-wife, supported him during the first trial and backed his version of events, or at least thought that he was innocent. But then that all changed during the second trial. What happened to change her mind?
Well, he'd been in prison by then. It was before he came out of prison, so he was jailed for life in 2007. Cindy was distraught, like, why won't he talk to me? We both lost children. Why won't he? He's letting other people go and visit him. He's letting a friend go. He's letting his sisters go. I'm the mother of those children. You'd think on their birthdays he might want to call me. And it all started to get uncomfortable. And I was calling down to visit her at different times just to check on how she was. You could almost see that denial coming away before your eyes. You know, I never made any comment. It was not for me to. And her new husband had said at the time, you know, the psychiatrist said this denial is all that's keeping her alive. But by then that denial was already collapsing and she was rocking in the chair, absolutely a wreck. I've never seen her such a wreck.
Now, Robert Farquharson has a number of supporters who've supported him for many years now. These include doctors and scientists. Could it be possible, Megan, that some of the science at the first two trials, some of that science was flawed? Could that be a possibility and for him still to have committed this crime?
I think it could. It's possible, isn't it? Science has certainly advanced. However, I noticed that the expert on TV that had been back there and measured the crash site and said the car needed the police said it needed 3 steering movements, 1 to the right and 2 others to avoid trees to hit the dam. The expert said it required 2 steering movements, the crucial one being the first one. The car turned to the right and veered off the highway. He didn't dispute that. And he was specifically asked in the TV interview, are you saying then the steering wheel was being operated by a conscious driver when he turned right and veered off the road, or that it could have happened if he were unconscious? And he said, yes, I'm saying it could have. It's possible. So they said, can you conclusively say, you know, that he hadn't coughed and was in a blackout? He said, no, I couldn't conclusively say that. I can just say that the car was steered off the road. So that would be for someone else to decide. He means the court. So I thought, well, you're not conclusive. And people have got to remember when he went to Winchelsea to do the measurements and measure the trajectory of the car into the dam, he's measuring a completely different road. That is not the road that Robert Farquharson drove along in 2005. There have been major road improvements, widening of the road, a new camber, it's been resurfaced. It's not the same road that this guy measured that Robert Farquharson drove his car along. So I'm sceptical about that. And the guy couldn't say that Robert was unconscious, but he couldn't say that he wasn't either. So I'm sceptical about that. I'm very sceptical about the medical evidence. There's nothing to show that he had cough syncope, except he had a couple of turns whilst awaiting trial the second time. I thought, how convenient in front of people. He gave 5 different stories. I dispute that. You know, they're saying his stories never changed. His story changed 4 or 5 times from the time of the accident to different people. He told a different story again to the police in hospital. You know, so he told a different story again to the police when he was interviewed at St Kilda Road. How many versions of that create doubt in the minds of a jury that would, and also that jury heard him at the second trial. He actually gave evidence. He was the most astonishing witness. He was a terrible witness.
And that was Megan Norris, who's a crime journalist and author of the book On Father's Day, which is based on Cindy Gambino's account of her children's murders. And her publisher is now reprinting the book in light of all the new interest in this case. Thank you for listening to today's briefing. That is all for this morning. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. Put it in their ears, and also you can keep up with our other content on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube. You just search for Listener Newsroom. I'm Katrina Blowers, and I will catch you next time.
listener.